Modern-day Christianity has changed. To anyone who has paid attention to mainstream Christian culture in America over the last 30 years, this is fairly obvious. The problem is that our perception of mainstream Christian culture hasn't. During the 90s and early 2000s, the mantra that people always used to criticize Christians was this: Christians want to be known by what they don't accept. I'd say this was pretty true. I grew up during this time. Coming out of the Reagan era, conservative Christianity took over the mainstream. Boomer and older Gen X Christians saw it as their civic and sacred duties to stand against things that were unbiblical, even if it meant condemning people who didn't consider themselves Christians. I'm not specifically talking about pop culture things either. I'm talking about the big sins of the time: drinking, smoking, secular music, abortion, and homosexuality. If you were a Christian who smoked, you would hear about it from some and get stern looks from others. While the Bible certainly doesn't condemn drinking, the old temperance movements from days gone by came back in an ugly fashion in the Christian mainstream. What about rock music? I remember as a kid hearing many Christians talk about how dangerous it was to listen to a lot of these bands, Christian or secular. It didn't matter if they were Christian bands with Christian messages and Christian lyrics, they were still bad. My cousin and I used to love listening to bands like Stryper and Petra and Whiteheart back in the late 80s and early 90s. I remember vividly hearing Christians talk about the dangers that were inherent with that type of music. They would talk about how these bands and this music had satanic themes to it and satanic ties to it. So that means that if you listen to it, even if it was a Christian band with Christian lyrics, Satan was still using this to corrupt you and to get to you, and somehow Satan would get a hold of you and you would be his puppet if you listened to this music. The last sin that I mentioned was homosexuality. At the time, there was near unanimous consent within the church about this issue, and mainstream preachers, as well as TBN, if you can remember them, or basically any other preacher who could get on TV, would be fervent in their condemnation of this sin. There was little focus put on hope, and little focus put on the life-changing power of Christ and the grace we all need to change, those important things of Christianity. Instead, there was a lot of convert or perish talk. That, however, was the past. I asked, is the mainstream culture still doing this within the church? A simple Google search of Christian judgmental will tell you that yes, millennial Christians are just like their parents, judgmental. These articles are from some pretty mainstream Christian publications like Relevant Magazine and Pastor Carey Nieuwhof. Is it still true, though? Are millennial Christians wanting to be known by what they don't accept? I say no. I don't think that that's true. My generation of Christians, I'm a millennial, have gone to the exact opposite end of the spectrum that our parents did in order to try to right the wrongs that we perceive our parents made. Most boomer Christians are conservative politically. Most millennial Christians are progressive. Boomer Christians want to be known by what they don't accept, and millennial Christians want to be known by what we do accept. So why is this important? And is that a bad thing? It's important because the narrative is still that Christians are super judgmental instead of too accepting. And as long as the narrative is on the wrong issue, on something that's not true, my generations of Christians will never get better because we're too focused on issues from the past that don't apply anymore today. I consider this a lot like the Christian version of white guilt. We are not responsible for the mistakes our parents' generation made, and to overcorrect those mistakes to being too quick to compromise biblical morality is just as big of a mistake. Jesus still had the temerity to say to people, "Go now and leave your life of sin." Millennial Christians would be all up in arms over things like that. "Jesus, you're being awfully judgmental of that person. Just love them." The truth is, sometimes love is saying the hard things to people and to hurt them temporarily in order to fix things long term, because you love them. Anyway, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we need to judge and condemn people who aren't Christians. The Bible is fairly clear on how useless that would be. Nor should we treat everybody with anything but love. What I'm saying is that we need to know in our own hearts what is the truth and what isn't. Do not compromise your own internal morality, biblical truth and morality, because of what other people are saying. Be honest with yourselves, millennials. So many of us compromise our core Christian values, not because we found some sort of better, deeper truth, but in order to not be outcasts, to not be different, to get along with what pop culture is telling us. In other words, to be friends with the world. James 4:4 says that, "Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy with God." Once again, this doesn't mean that we treat people with anything but love. It just means that you need to have a strong foundation on the truth and not give in on issues because pop culture says so. As long as millennial Christians are focused way too much on the ways our parents' generation messed up, we're going to completely miss and ignore the ways that we are currently messing up right now, and the church will not get stronger. So who and what are we going to be? As far as I see, we have a choice here. We can be people that want to be known for what we accept, or we can be loving people who are also principled. Too many millennials are choosing to be the former. I want to be the latter.